Hello, my name is Isaiah Perez, and I am going to be going over the main differences between quantitative and qualitative research designs. They primarily differ in their approach to how they collect data, the analysis, and the interpretation of that data. Quantitative research involves numerical data that seeks to establish patterns, test theories, and make predictions. They often use surveys, experiments, or statistical analysis and typically require a larger sample size to be more general. The analysis involves statistical analysis in order to draw the conclusions, and the results are usually presented in graphs, tables, and statistical significance. Qualitative research typically involves non-numerical data such as words, images, or objects, and aims to understand the concept, the experiences, or any social phenomena. The methods often used for qualitative research involve interviews, focus groups, or content analysis, and generally involve a smaller sample size so that it can be more targeted. The analysis for this data is normally thematically or narratively analyzed, just focusing on patterns and the meanings of these patterns. And the results are usually presented in descriptive forms, highlighting any themes or insights found. A researcher might have to choose between them, and what they really have to ask themselves is what that research question is. If the goal is to measure and quantify relationships or any trends, then the quantitative method is preferred. Just for exploring deeper meanings or experiences, qualitative methods are preferred. Social phenomena often benefit from the qualitative methods, while any straightforward, measurable questions could align best with quantitative methods. They also have to ask themselves about resource availability, because quantitative research may require more resources for the larger samples that they require, while the qualitative methods could be less resource intensive since it's a more targeted sample size. Last thing they really have to consider is the flexibility, being that qualitative research really allows for adjustments during their study, while the quantitative trends tend to follow a fixed line or fixed protocol. Ultimately, that choice does depend on the research goals, the nature being studied, and any practical considerations such as time and resources. But it is known that some researchers also use mixed methods to leverage the strengths of both of the approaches. An example of quantitative research, I found a healthcare organization wanting to evaluate the effectiveness of a new medication for hypertension. Would be a great example because the organization would have to conduct clinical trials involving participants across multiple hospitals to test this. The method that they would have to use would be participants randomly being assigned to either a treatment group receiving the new medication or a control group receiving a placebo. An example for a qualitative research method would be a nonprofit organization wanting to understand the barriers or obstacles faced by low-income families in accessing mental health services. This would be a qualitative research because the organization would have to conduct interviews within the community centers or any shelters over an expanded period of time, and researchers would have to conduct in-depth interviews with families who have sought mental health services, exploring their experiences and any challenges that they faced throughout the time. An analytical procedure utilized by a qualitative researcher, I would have to say, would be thematic analysis. The way they would have to go about this is researchers do have to familiarize themselves with any pre-existing data by reading or rereading transcripts from current interviews or focus groups to help them gain a deep understanding of the content. The research then would have to begin collecting data by identifying any text that appears interesting or relevant, and then searching for any themes within that data that they've collected. The researcher would then have to review and refine any of these themes by checking if they accurately reflect any already established data. And then the researcher would then have to define what each theme is about and name them in a way that reflects their essence. Finally, the researcher would just have to report their findings, weaving together any themes with relevant quotes or examples from collected data and pre-existing data. An analytical procedure used by a quantitative researcher, I would say, would be regression analysis. So with a regression analysis, you would have to begin by identifying any dependent and independent variables, then collecting any data on the variables of interest. This can involve collecting that data by using surveys, experiments, or any observational studies, and then decide on the type of regression analysis to use. The common types of regression analysis involve linear regression, which is used when the relationship between the two variables are linear. The second option would be multiple regression, which is used when there are multiple independent variables. And the last would be logistic regression, which is used when the dependent variable is binary, so any yes or no questionnaires. Then after that, using statistical software to fit the regression model to the data. This would involve estimating any coefficients for each independent variable. After fitting that model, you would then have to interpret the results by examining the output, which typically includes examining any coefficients, showing the proportion of variance in the dependent variable, and helping determine the statistical significance of each predictor. Lastly, you would have to make any predictions once that model has been validated and evaluate how well that model fits the data through diagnostics such as residual analysis, which checks for any patterns that might suggest that there's a model misfit or any assumption violations. An example for both of these research methods, for the thematic analysis, I found that a study exploring the experiences of caregivers for individuals with Alzheimer's disease tend to use thematic analysis as it might reveal themes such as any emotional tolls, lack of support, or coping strategies. Each theme would be supported by the quotes of their caregivers, providing any insights into any challenges or experiences. For the regression analysis, I found that if a researcher would like to understand how different factors influence a student's exam scores in a statistics course, the researcher would collect any data on study hours, attendance, previous GPAs, age of the students, and that dependent variable would be the final exam score. When using any open AI tools like ChatGPT in the search process, I would say it's essential to exercise caution because you could sacrifice integrity or any reliability in your work. A couple things that you would have to look into to avoid misuse of OpenAI or any artificial intelligence would be to verify all the information that you receive from those chats. Avoid depending solely on ChatGPT or any OpenAI products. Understand that there are limitations to AI. Avoiding any plagiarism, as AI is all over the internet. Anybody can access this, so you can really ensure that any content generated by AI is cited or rephrased. You would have to use ethical considerations, be mindful that there are ethical implications, especially when it comes to sensitive topics. And AI should not be used to manipulate information or mislead any audiences. you would need to guard against bias. Be cautious because biases may be present in the AI's training data. Recognizing that AI can perpetuate stereotypes or biases that exist in the data it was trained on. And lastly, privacy and confidentiality. You should avoid inputting any sensitive or personally identifiable information, as this could compromise confidentiality and privacy within the system. If researchers could essentially use AI tools like OpenAI effectively and responsibly to enhance their work without compromising quality or integrity.